Hello, Da Vinci. Welcome to the last lesson that will be up today. So we've got our comprehension lesson today. Now, comprehension is going to work in two ways. The first way is you're going to have a lesson where you will have pencil, you'll have paper, and I'll be asking you and reading you the questions, and then you'll be answering the questions from the questions on the screen. Okay, so you'll be answering them. There might be some answers where you need to tick them or you need to write down the answer. Whatever it is, that'll be one part of the lesson. But there's another part of comprehension, and this is what today's lesson is. We're going to be reading the questions together. I'm going to be reading you what the text is that's part of the questions. We're going to work through it together. You can pause the video, have that discussion of what you think the answer is. We're then going to work together and go through the answers. You don't need to write anything down in this lesson, but I want you to really be listening and talking to your partner. And then once we've done that, we'll go through all of the answers until the end of the video. And then in our next comprehension video, we should then be having a good go at writing down the answers with some pencil and paper. Okay, so today's learning objective is, can I answer questions about a text by reading and listening to it? Okay, so what do you reckon our text is today? See if you're awake. Well, the text today is going to be Man on the Moon, a day in the life of Bob. So this is Bob. Perhaps you've heard people talk of him. You may know him better as the man on the moon. That's our piece of text. So that is the main text that we're going to be using to answer the next questions. So the first question says, what is his name? The second question is, what do people call him? So I'm going to read the text to you again, then pause the video and see whether you can answer those questions. So it says, this is Bob. Perhaps you've heard people talk of him. You may know him better as the man on the moon. So what is his name and what do people call him? Pause the video, have that discussion with your partner, that might be your teddy or your toy or someone else in the room, and you can discuss what you think the answer is. Pause the video, do that now. Okay, so this is Bob. Perhaps you've heard of him. You may know him better as the man on the moon. What is his name? Well, his name is Bob. It says, this is Bob. So we've just copied that straight in. Bob is his name, isn't it? What do people call him? Well, people call him the man on the moon. You may know him better as the man on the moon. So right now, what we're going to do is we can just highlight what that important information is. Let me see if I can get a slightly different colored highlighter, and then that's going to help us see it a bit easier. So if I do put, there we go, look at that. So what was his name? Bob, straight away there. What you may know him better as the man on the moon. That's where I got my answer from. You can see I've highlighted that important information. Let's go on to the next part. This is where Bob lives. Every morning he rises at 6 o'clock. He has a cup of tea and 2 eggs for breakfast before leaving for the rocket launch pad. On the way, he stops to buy a newspaper and some chocolate toffees. He's on his way to work. The question is, what time does Bob wake up? I'll read the text for you again, and then I'd like you to pause the video. This is where Bob lives. Every morning he rises at 6 o'clock. He has a cup of tea and 2 eggs for breakfast before leaving for the rocket launch pad. On the way, he stops to buy a newspaper and some chocolate toffees. He's on his way to work. What time does Bob get up? Pause the video and have that discussion. Now, this is a bit of a tricky one. It says this is where Bob lives. Every morning he rises. Now, the question is asking, what time does Bob wake up? Every morning he rises. Now, it doesn't say wake up, but it says the word rises. And rises is the type of word when if the sun rises, it comes up into the sky. If you rise, you get up. So if you rise from your bed, you're going to get up out of bed. So with that extra information of what rises means, can you now answer the question of when he gets up? Well, the answer is going to be 6 o'clock because that's when he rises, when he gets up. So every morning he gets up at 6 o'clock. So what time does he wake up? He wakes up at 6. This is where Bob lives. Every morning he rises at 6 o'clock. He has a cup of tea and 2 eggs for breakfast before leaving for the rocket launch pad. On the way, he stops to buy a newspaper and some chocolate toffees. He's on his way to work. Choose 2. What does Bob buy on his way to work? So, what does he buy on his way to work? You need to choose 2. You've got number 1, our first answer is 2 eggs. The second answer is newspaper. The third answer is chocolate toffees. The fourth answer is rocket. This is where Bob lives. Every morning he rises at 6 o'clock. He has a cup of tea and 2 eggs for breakfast before leaving for the rocket launch pad. On the way, he stops to buy a newspaper and some chocolate toffees. He's on his way to work. On the way, he stops to buy. Now that tells me that somewhere around there is going to be my answer. So let's have a think. A newspaper, so that's this one, tick, and some chocolate toffees, that's this one, tick. So my answer is going to be 3 and 2. So let's check. It's going, oh, my answer's not down there, but I can tell you the answer is question number 3 and question number 2, because that's the answer, or answer number 2 and answer number 3, because those are the 2 things that he says he's on his way to work to buy. By 8 o'clock, Bob arrives at the launch pad. He changes into his special man-on-the-moon suit and he boards his fantastic rocket ship. He must make sure he leaves by 9:15, otherwise he wouldn't make it to the moon by 9. On the way, he reads the newspaper and does the crossword. What does Bob change into when he arrives at the launch pad? So what does he change into? By 8 o'clock, Bob arrives at the launch pad. So that's the bit of information that's going to help us of where our answer is, because it says in the question, what does Bob change into when he arrives at the launch pad? Well, it says where by the 8 o'clock when Bob arrives at the launch pad, what does he do? He changes into his special man-on-the-moon suit. So his moon suit is the answer. If you saw that, you're a bit cheeky because I did it wrong. But what is the right answer is the fact that it's a man-on-the-moon suit, his moon suit, because it says just underneath when he arrives. By 8 o'clock, Bob arrives at the launch pad, changes into his special man-on-the-moon suit, and boards his fantastic rocket ship. He must make sure he leaves by 9:15, otherwise he wouldn't make it to the moon by 9. On the way, he reads the newspaper and does the crossword. Find the word that means the same as to get on. To get on. So if someone was to get on something, what's the word that means the same as this? So I'll read it again. By 8 o'clock, Bob arrives at the launch pad. He changes into his special man-on-the-moon suit and boards his fantastic rocket ship. Now we're looking for a word that means the same as gets onto something. See whether you can figure it out. Pause the video if you need a bit of extra thinking time to read through it. So, we need a word that means he's going to get onto something. He changes into his special man-on-the-moon suit and boards his fantastic rocket ship. Now, he boards his fantastic rocket ship, which means he's getting onto his fantastic rocket ship. So what is the word that means the same as get on, to get on something? Well, the word would be board. Now, board is not the same type of like cardboard or anything like that. It means to get on. If you board a train or if you board an airplane or a ship or a ferry, you get on by boarding it. Okay, here we go. So it's the same piece of text here. So I'll read it through once we've found the question, because we might know the question better than the text. So what happens if Bob doesn't leave on time? Now, this is a tricky one because it doesn't actually tell you what happens, but it does give you an idea of what might happen, okay? So what happens if Bob doesn't leave on time? So we're going to look for the bit about where Bob needs to make sure this part looks like it's going to be the one that's going to help us. So we're going to read this part here, okay? Because the first bit's all about his moon suit and getting on his rocket ship. He must make sure he leaves by 8:45, otherwise he wouldn't make it to the moon by 9. So what we need to do is we need to... Okay, so he must make sure he leaves by 8:45, otherwise he wouldn't make it to the moon by 9. The bit of information that's going to help us is this second part of the sentence. Otherwise, he wouldn't make it to the moon by 9. That's telling us he is going to be late. Wouldn't make it on time is the same as saying he would be late. So that is the information from this question that's going to help us. Bob starts work. His job as the man on the moon is very important. He has to keep the moon clean and tidy. Quite often, astronauts drop sweet packets and cans. Some people say that aliens are responsible for much of the rubbish, but Bob knows that's not true. There's no such thing as aliens. That's the text. That's going to help us answer the question. Now, this is the question. Find a word that shows that the people blame the aliens for leaving rubbish on the moon. So there's a word in this piece of text, and it shows us that people blame the aliens for leaving their rubbish. Now, it's a bit of a difficult question to understand, but I'll read the text again and then it might make a bit more sense, okay? So we need to find a word that shows that the people blame the aliens for leaving the rubbish on the moon. Bob starts work. His job as the man on the moon is very important. He has to keep the moon clean and tidy. Quite often, astronauts drop sweet packets and cans. Some people say that aliens are responsible for much of the rubbish, but Bob knows that's not true. There's no such thing as aliens. Pause the video and have that discussion. Well, once you've had that discussion, you've come back to the video and you have seen that we're looking for a word that's blame, and we're looking for something to do with the aliens. Now, this is the only part of the sentence that mentions aliens. These three sentences here are the only ones, or it might be two sentences, sorry, are the only ones that mention aliens. There's no mention of it up there, so it can't be up there. Now, it says some people say that aliens are responsible for much of the rubbish. Now, that first part of the sentence has something to do with aliens and something to do with leaving rubbish. So it's got to be in this part. Now, which word looks like a word that might mean something to do with blame? Well, it's not going to be any of these first words before aliens, because we know what those mean. It's nothing to do with blaming someone. After aliens, the only word that looks a bit unfamiliar is the word responsible. And that's the correct word. Responsible means whether you're the one that has done something. So if I'm responsible for making a good video, you need to make sure that this video comes out and is good. If the aliens are responsible for making the rubbish, they are being blamed for making the rubbish, okay? Now, that is the end of our comprehension. And I know it's a lot of me talking, you listening, you doing some of your own discussions, but I'm just showing you the type of questions we're going to be looking at in our comprehension lessons, so that when we go to our next comprehension lesson, you've got a better idea of what type of skills you're going to need to answer the questions. Thank you for coming along to this lesson. I look forward to see you in the next lesson. This is the last lesson for this week that I've been recording, so I'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.